This is a make or break decade for our planet and the people that call it home. 2030 is the deadline for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of ambitious targets for a better, fairer, and more equal world for all. The global fight against corruption is crucial a world where the common good comes first and where power is held to account. The challenges ahead are many. We are witnessing an increase in populism and with it the declining of trust in institutions and less space to make our voices heard. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis and conflicts are intensifying these threats. But despite the many challenges, there are also opportunities. Our societies understand better than ever the devastating consequences of corruption. There is now less tolerance for the harm it does to people and their communities. Technology has given us the opportunity to improve governance and has helped us be more informed and engaged about decisions that affect us all. People are ready to take action and to demand transparency and integrity from those with power, holding them to account. Our vision is of a world free of corruption. Over the next decade, we will work with governments, politicians, businesses, and people everywhere to help make this vision a reality for everybody and everywhere. Learn more about our strategy at transparency.org/strategy.
Transparency International presents the Corruption Perceptions Index 2019. Using a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, the CPI analyzes public sector corruption in 180 countries and territories around the world. The top countries are New Zealand and Denmark, while the bottom countries are Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria. However, when it comes to improving on corruption, the majority of countries are stagnating. Our analysis shows how the stream of big money in politics is linked to higher rates of corruption. In fact, low CPI scores are also associated with higher concentrations of power among the rich, while poorer citizens have little to no political influence. But even countries with high CPI scores aren't free of corruption. Multiple scandals show that transnational corruption is often facilitated by countries at the top of the index, countries where the proceeds of corruption are stashed. To prevent corruption and ensure that politicians and institutions always act in the public interest, governments must meaningfully engage citizens in decision-making processes. Help us spread the
proceedings of our meeting this morning. And before we get into it, allow me to just call to the podium Mr. Adam Daka to come and offer a prayer as we start.
Shall we pray together? Almighty God and Father, we gather in your name for the sake of our beloved country, Zambia. We are here for a common cause, to look at the issues of corruption. We know, God, that you hate corruption and you hate the corrupt. We know that where corruption prevails, human rights are abused, and also democracy becomes meaningless. It is in this regard, our Almighty Father, that you give us the zeal and courage to fight corruption in our country. We want to bring to the fore that you bless all those that are going to take part in the deliberations, our presenters, bless them with the knowledge and wisdom, so that they speak the truth against corruption. It is in your mighty name, Almighty God, that we bring ourselves, our energies, and everything. Bless our gathering here up to the end. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adam Daka. I will now ask each and every one of you to be upstanding for the national anthem.
Stand and sing of Zambia, proud and free, land of wealth and joy in unity, victors in the struggle for the right. We won freedom's fight, oh, and strong and free. Africa is our let us all have people join as one, brothers under the sun, oh, one, strong and free. One land and one nation is our cry, dignity and peace is Zambia's sky, like a noble eagle in its flight. Praise to thee, O one, strong and free. Praise be to God, praise be. Bless our great Zambia, remain we stand under the flag of our land. Zambia, praise to thee, O
At this particular juncture, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just make special recognition to distinguished ladies and gentlemen that are with us this morning. Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, who is Transparency International Zambia board member, representing the chapter president, Mr. Sampa Kalungu. We acknowledge and appreciate your presence. Mr. Ruben Leforce, who is Transparency International Global Chair. We acknowledge your presence. Mr. Maurice Nyambe, who is the Executive Director of Transparency International Zambia. Dr. George Magwende, who is Permanent Secretary Administration from the Ministry of Health. Mr. Imbewe, who is Deputy Auditor General, and Mr. Jonathan Lear Howarth, who is Country Director from the Norwegian Church Aid. Mr. Peter Kabengele, who is Deputy Director Administration in the Zambia Police Service at the headquarters, representing the Inspector General of Police. Officials from the Zambia Revenue Authority, officials from the Anti-Corruption Commission, those of us that are with us from the judiciary, those of us that are joining us from civil society organizations, and colleagues from the media. Allow me to take this privilege to amiably welcome each and every one of you to the 2021 Corruption Perceptions Index launch. For the uninitiated, ladies and gentlemen, the Corruption Perception Index is an international measure of public corruption It aggregates data from a maximum of 13 different sources that provide perceptions by business people and country experts on the level of corruption in the public sector. Each year, the CPI report is simultaneously launched globally, regionally, and locally by Transparency International in partnership with local chapters across the world. Over the years, the launch of the CPI has attracted different stakeholders such as government officials, representatives from the international organizations, civil society, the media, and the general public, as demonstrated by this well-represented gathering. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very important meeting for a progressive democracy such as Zambia, because corruption, if left unchecked, does not only undermine the principles of impartial democracy, but also hampers development, which is a vehicle that can be used to change the livelihoods, of people. And as such, concerted efforts in combating this vice is very, very vital. As we commence, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to just introduce our distinguished Mr. Maurice Nyambe, that will come to give us the welcoming remarks. And Mr. Nyambe, as indicated earlier, is the Executive Director from the Transparency International Zambia. A big hand for Mr. Nyambe.
Thank you. Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Allow me to ride on the protocols that the program director has already established. But maybe just a quick correction. I noticed that in his salutations, he referred to Mr. Ruben Leforce as the global chair of Transparency International. So the correct position is that Mr. Leforce is the global vice chair of Transparency International, unless maybe he has had a conversation with our program director and told him his intentions to go for the top position. Maybe he will tell us when he comes to do his presentation. But it's great to see all of you this morning. We are happy that you have been able to join us for what is a very great occasion for us. And indeed, it is my privilege and honor on behalf of the members, the board, the management, and staff of Transparency International Zambia to extend our very warm welcome to all of you that have joined us this morning. I also take the opportunity to welcome those of you who are joining us via our various social media platforms. Today is a very special day for us because we are launching the 2021 Corruption Perceptions Index, whose theme is corruption, human rights, and democracy. Now, as many of you know, the CPI is Transparency International's flagship tool that provides a useful insight into the state of corruption in countries across the world. You will hear more details about how the CPI is computed through the presentations that will be made today. But suffice to say that today's launch of the 2021 edition of the CPI is a global event that is simultaneously taking place in all chapters that make up the Transparency International global movement. Ladies and gentlemen, Transparency International has never made secret the fact that the CPI may not be the perfect measuring tool for corruption, given the multifaceted nature of the scourge. That notwithstanding, there can be no doubt that it remains the most widely used global corruption ranking in the world, and that is partly what gives it its appeal and legitimacy, in addition to the primary data upon which it relies. Now, TIZ has continued to work with many of the organizations that are present here today, and we have no doubt that the launch of the 2021 CPI will be yet another opportunity for enhancing our ongoing collaboration in the fight against corruption in Zambia. We are looking forward to the expert reactions of these organizations to the findings that will be revealed later this morning. In the same vein, we would like to call on the media to not only engage fully with the 2021 CPI findings, but to also help disseminate this information in a manner that will make it easy for citizens to engage and contribute to Zambia's fight against corruption. Lastly, our hope is that the UPND government will adopt a more sober and collaborative approach to the findings that will be released today. Our experience from previous releases of the CPI shows that government has tended to be dismissive of the findings and largely taken them as CSOs making their usual noise. We would like to urge the current government to be different and use the 2021 CPI findings as an additional tool within their broader framework of fighting corruption. As TIZ, we stand ready for further engagement with government, with fellow CSOs, with the private sector and any other stakeholders on any aspect of the 2021 CPI in particular, but also on the anti-corruption crusade in general. So once again, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to our launch of the 2021 CPI, and we are very much looking forward to spending this morning with you in a mutually productive manner. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morris Nyambe, for that cordial welcoming remarks. As we move on, ladies and gentlemen, to the next segment on our program, allow me, first of all, to just indicate that the beauty about a meeting such as this is that stakeholders do not only come, to witness how a country is performing when it comes to the fight against corruption, but I believe it also creates an opportunity, an environment, an atmosphere where people can interact and be able to exchange ideas, practical ideas that can help to better the fight against this vice that has plagued many, many democracies. Ladies and gentlemen, as we proceed with our program, before we get to the findings, I know most of us are anxious to get to the actual launch of the report and the findings thereof. We will first of all get an opportunity just to understand exactly the methodology and the sources of data that led to the findings that we will be exposed to. And for this, we will be exposed to a video. Is our I-team ready? And we will kindly ask if we could maybe just reduce the lighting in the room.
Corruption Perceptions Index, also known as the CPI, scores and ranks countries around the world based on how corrupt their public sector is perceived to be. The scores reflect the views of experts. Corruption Perceptions Index, also known as the CPI, scores and ranks countries around the world based on how corrupt their public sector is perceived to be. The scores reflect the views of experts or surveys of business people, not the general public. We calculate the CPI using data from 13 different external sources. Transparency International is not involved in the production of any of these 13 datasets. The CPI includes data produced by the World Bank and the World Economic Forum, as well as by private risk and consulting companies and think tanks. Each of the 13 sources rates countries using its own scale. One source rates countries on a scale of 1 to 7, for instance, while another uses a scale of 1 to 100. As a result, direct comparison of country scores between different sources is not possible. Therefore, we transform each score from the original scale into standardized values that show the position of each country relative to others. By doing this, we are able to compare country scores across the 13 different data sources. After standardizing all scores, we then convert them into a scale from 0 to 100, which we use for the CPI. Next, we simply calculate the average of the transformed scores for each country. The average score is the CPI value for each country. In order to ensure reliability of the results, only countries with data from at least 3 sources are included in the CPI. The CPI results are comparable across time back to 2012. This is because when we convert the original data to the CPI scale, we take into account the 2012 parameters, which turns 2012 into the baseline year. Annual CPI results from before 2012 cannot be compared to other years. The 13 different data sources used to calculate the CPI all measure various aspects of corruption in the public sector. This ranges from bribery, the diversion of public funds, and the effective prosecution of corruption cases, to adequate legal frameworks, access to information, and legal protections for whistleblowers, journalists, and investigators. The CPI does not measure activities such as tax fraud, money laundering, financial secrecy, or illicit flows of money. Corruption generally involves illegal activities which are deliberately hidden and only come to light through scandals, investigations, or prosecutions. Researchers, civil society, and governments have made advances in measuring corruption in specific sectors. However, to date, there is no index which directly measures real levels of corruption in all its manifestations. The data sources that make up the CPI ask business executives and country experts questions which are based on carefully designed questionnaires. The CPI scores generally correlate with certain objective measures, including citizens' reported experience with bribery. To ensure that the CPI methodology and results are reliable, the index is regularly reviewed by independent evaluators. Such reviews have consistently shown that the CPI is statistically and conceptually coherent. Ultimately, the CPI is the most widely used corruption measurement indicator due to the wide global coverage, the increased reliability which comes with combining different sources, and the fact that it reconciles different points of view on what constitutes public sector corruption. For more information, please visit www.transparency.org/CPI.
And regional performance. But as we do that, before I ask Mr. Leforce to come to the podium, having introduced him inaccurately earlier on, allow me to redeem myself by presenting him correctly. Mr. Leforce is a governance expert and current Transparency International Vice Chairperson. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the Copperbelt University and a Master of Science in Integrated Environmental Management from the University of Bath, UK. Additionally, he has a postgraduate diploma in project management, and he is a 2011 Draper Hills Summer Fellow in Democracy, Development and Rule of Law from Stanford University, USA. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege, and help me call to the podium Mr. Ruben Leforce.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. I will ride on the protocols that have already been given by yourself. And I'm glad that you redeemed yourself regarding the new position you gave me. Only Burkina Faso has had coup. There's been no coup in Transparency International. So I'm still the vice chair, not the chair. The purpose of my presentation this morning is essentially to give you a flavor of the global and regional results, but also to talk to some of the key messages arising from the CPI. So let's just start with the basics. Again, this is what the video was trying to portray. The CPI ranks 180 countries. So 180 countries and territories by their perceived levels of public sector corruption. And this is according to experts and business people that work with the respective countries. So the catch there is that we're only looking at public sector corruption. And we are basing this on experts and business people that are surveyed who have dealings with the respective countries. We rely on 13 independent data sources, and this is important. The surveys are not done by Transparency International. We rely on 13 independent data sources, ranging from the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the African Development Bank, Varieties of Democracy, etc. So there are 13 data sources. And once we receive the information on a non-disclosure basis, they give us this information, we standardize the information. Because the 13 sources use different ranking systems. So some will rank 1 out of 10 or any other ranking. When we get that ranking for a particular country, we standardize it so that then we can compute the index. If we go to the next slide, so each country's score is a combination of at least 3 data sources. So if we have a country that does not have 3 data sources, we cannot include it on the CPI. That is why when we come to Zambia, you'll see that we are talking of more than 3 data sources. And like I said, the data sources are collected by a variety of reputable institutions, including the World Bank and the World Economic Forum. What are the key messages for this year? So in this year's CPI, if we go to the next slide, we do note that corruption levels are at a standstill worldwide. 86% of the countries, 180 countries, made little to no progress in the last 10 years. So they've almost been at the standstill. Or if they've made any improvements, they're very marginal. And more than 2/3 of the countries, that's 68%, score below 50 out of 100. Remember, 0 means that you are clean or you are not clean. 100 means you are very clean, insofar as the CPI is concerned. So we're saying more than 68% have scored below 50 on the CPI score. And the global average score remains static at 43. And those are the schematics there. The 180 countries surveyed. We use a CPI score of 0 to 100. The 50 over 100 is 2/3. And the average score out of the 180 is 43. So now I'll show you the map, and that map indicates, in a way, the CPI. Where it is very red, it means it's not clean. Where it is yellow, it means they are towards the 100 mark. So very red is towards the 0, very yellow is towards the 100. So if you look closely, I'm sure you already have the CPI scores. But let's go through them. So the top 10 countries in 2021, Denmark has the highest score of 88 out of 100. Finland and New Zealand also have 88. They are 2 and 3 simply because of the standard rate of errors. Denmark is slightly better placed. Then you have Norway, you have Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Germany. On the bottom side, you have South Sudan is on the last, Syria, Somalia, Venezuela, Yemen, North Korea, Afghanistan, Libya, Equatorial Guinea, Turkmenistan, and the Republic of the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Burundi. Those are in the bottom 12. So, if we go to the next slide, some of the key messages. The top countries on the index, like I indicated, are Denmark, Finland, and New Zealand. But what is important insofar as, the slide before that, please. Let's go back to the slide, yes. What is important about this is that the top countries also are in the top 10% on the world insofar as democracy index on civil liberties is concerned. Remember, we are talking about corruption and human rights. So already we can see the correlation between countries that are doing well on the CPI, they're also doing well on the index for civil liberties. Somalia, Syria, and South Sudan remain at the bottom, but also they rank last on civil liberties. Although we have to mention that Somalia and South Sudan are not rated insofar as the democracy index on civil liberties is concerned. So a clear link has been made already on corruption and the issue of civil liberties. If you go to the next slide. Since 2012, 23 countries have significantly declined on the CPI, including advanced economies. Australia, Canada, and the US are some of the developed countries that have dropped significantly on the CPI. The US, for the first time, has dropped out of the top 25 countries on the index. And this is a cause for concern. Canada, despite being number one in the Americas, has dropped nearly 9 points on the CPI. But 25 countries have significantly improved their CPI scores. And this includes Estonia, Seashells. Seashells has risen to the top of the African continent, and Armenia. These have made significant improvements. However, 27 countries, among them Cyprus at 53, Lebanon 24, and Honduras 23 are all at the historical lows this year. I can also add Nigeria. Nigeria is at a historical low. They are only scoring 24 out of 100. So when you look at the 10-year trend, you may not see it from the back, but like I said, 25 countries have improved. 23 countries have declined significantly. 131 countries remain static. So in the graph, we do show those that have gone up and down. Again, this might be small given the size of a whole, but I'm just now showing you the entire matrix. And if you go on, even now, if you have your phone and you go on www.transparency.org/CPI, you'll find all this information. I'm essentially just, if you go back one slide, I'm demonstrating that Denmark, the slide before please. So Denmark at number 1, and I go all the way to United Arab Emirates. What is important is that we are showing you both the CPI score for 2021, the ranking, and the scores for 2020. But we also show you the standard error for 2021. And if you read the entire matrix, it shows you the different sources of information. So all this is on your website, if you go on the website. So if you go on the next slide, I've just given you a flavor that Africa only comes in much, much later, and Seashells is the highest ranked African country, the one highlighted in yellow, followed by Cape Verde down at the bottom. I've deliberately skipped Zambia because this will be presented by a board member. Otherwise, I steal the thunder from him. So the next slide also just shows you the bottom half of the table. What is key is Brunei has no score, and the reason why it has no score and is at the bottom is not because it's a West in terms of countries, but we don't have 3 scores for Brunei. So in this document, you also see, if you go to the next slide, we show you the 5-year trend. And I think what is key is that there are some key movers on the CPI, and I'll speak to these in a short while. So let's go to the regional trends. So on average, you find that Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest score, 33 out of 100. This is followed by Middle East and North Africa. We normally call them the MENA region at 39. In fact, it's the Eastern Europe, then MENA region. So Eastern Europe is 36, MENA region is 39, and the Americas is 43. Asia Pacific, which includes Australia and New Zealand, is at 45. And then Western Europe is the highest at 66 out of 100. But let's just go through the regional mappings. So if we start with the Americas, 43 out of 100 as the average. We surveyed 32 countries. Canada is the highest at 74 out of 100, followed by Uruguay at 73 out of 100, Chile 67 out of 100, and USA 67 out of 100. At the bottom of the Americas is Venezuela at 14 out of 100, Nicaragua at 20 out of 100, and Haiti at 20 out of 100. So I'm showing you the top performance and the bottom performance for each region. If we go to Asia Pacific, the next region, please. The next region, yes, that's 45 over 100 as the average. 31 countries surveyed. New Zealand at the top at 88 over 100. Singapore, 85 over 100. Hong Kong, it's at 76 over 100. Then at the bottom, North Korea, 16 out of 100. Afghanistan, 16 out of 100. And Cambodia, 23 out of 100. The next slide, please. We go to Eastern Europe. It's 36 over 100 as average, 19 countries surveyed. Georgia is at 55 out of 100. Armenia, 49 over 100. Montenegro at 46 over 100. And at the bottom, Turkmenistan, 19 out of 100. Tajikistan, 25 out of 100, and Kyrgyzstan, 27 out of 100. Middle East. The Middle East is 39 over 100 as the average, 18 countries surveyed. United Arab Emirates at the top, 69 over 100, and Qatar at 63 out of 100. Syria at the bottom, 13 out of 100. Yemen, 16 out of 100. Libya, 17 out of 100. Unsurprisingly so, all these countries are involved or have had civil wars in the last couple of years. If we go to the Western Europe, the high flyers, so Denmark at the top, 88, followed by Finland, then Sweden, 85 out of 100, and Norway, 85 out of 100. At the bottom of the pile is Bulgaria, 42 out of 100, Hungary, 43 out of 100, and Romania, 45 out of 100. Sub-Saharan Africa, where Zambia is, Seashells at the top, so this is 33 out of 100 as the average, 49 countries surveyed, 70 out of 100 for Seashells, and look at the gap. The next country is Cape Verde, which is 58 out of 100. Botswana, which has been a high flyer, is a disappointing country this year, 55 out of 100. And at the bottom is South Sudan, 11 out of 100. Somalia, 13 out of 100. Equatorial Guinea, it's 17 out of 100. Now let's look at the regional trends. So like I said, Seychelles scores 70, right at the top, followed by Cape Verde and Botswana, who are distant countries. The bottom index, part of the index, is Equatorial Guinea, Somalia, and South Sudan, where endemic corruption remains daunting. Now let's look at the performance of Seashells. This is a top performer this year. Seashells has moved up by 18 points since 2012. And they've been making this steady progress on the CPI. They've opened up government. They've had significant anti-corruption reforms. And it shows insofar as the CPI is concerned. However, we do have a concern about Seashells. Recently, they moved a bill in Parliament to remove spouses and close relatives of politicians from declaring assets. We hope that that does not affect their CPI in the next couple of years. Angola has moved up, and I'm sure the new Dawn government will be looking to Angola. 7 points up since 2012, and this marks a very significant improvement on the CPI. And this follows the election of President João Lourenço in 2017, who has promised to crack down on corruption. And he has started to investigate the former First family, members of the former First family, and they are pursuing a number of high-profile corruption investigations, including asset recovery. One of the top performers, Botswana, has hit its historical low in 2021. This is the worst performance for Botswana, and it records a significant decline from a score of 65 in 2012 to 55 in 2021. And the results do corroborate the findings of our 2019 Global Corruption Barometer Survey, which show that most people in Botswana thought that corruption had increased. So it's not surprising, therefore, that Botswana is performing badly. Last year, TI, working with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, released the Pandora's Papers. And in the Pandora's Papers, we highlighted nearly 50 politicians and at least current or former heads of states, 5 current or former heads of states who were cited in the Pandora's Papers. And linked to this, in Nigeria, they've hit their lowest low on the CPI at 24, where more than 100 powerful individuals were exposed in the Pandora's Papers as having used anonymous companies to buy properties with a total worth of 350 million British pounds in the United Kingdom alone. So this is not surprising. Again, you can make the link between the kleptocracy that we're seeing and the new levels of corruption in that country. Let me now turn to the theme of corruption and human rights. Basically, what we're saying as Transparency International is that restricting freedom of expression, association, and assembly is a popular tactic to weaken societal checks on corruption. This, at the same time, helps to perpetuate corrupt networks and practices. In the worst cases, corrupt officials can also find ways to capture the judiciary and oversight institutions. So it's a continuous cycle. Corruption can be an enabler of human rights abuses, and because of that, corruption will then undermine the state's ability to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. And corruption will allow autocrats and human rights abusers to enjoy looted wealth and reward cronies. And because of corruption, you can launder reputation abroad and essentially evade accountability. But also, because of corruption, you weaken civil and political rights. And when you have weak civil and political rights, freedom of expression, freedom of association, access to justice, and the right to participate in public affairs is compromised. So when you have weak civil and political rights, it leads to human rights abuses, which is detrimental to the fight against corruption. And how is this detrimental to the fight against corruption? Limited freedom of speech, assembly, and participation pave the way for abusers of power and hinder the ability of groups to hold power to account. So human rights are important in the fight against corruption. And like we've demonstrated, countries which enjoy civil liberties are able to control the rate of corruption. Again, I'll not go through the next chart because it's too tiny, but when you go on the website, you essentially see a correlation between civil rights and the CPI 2021. Countries that are doing well on the CPI are also doing well in protecting civil liberties. Countries that are performing very low have a very low civil liberties index score. Now, the message from my boss, who I almost overthrew in Zambia. So Dr. Delia Ferrari Rubio, the chair of Transparency International, says this on corruption and human rights. She says, human rights are not simply a nice to have in the fight against corruption. Authoritarianism makes anti-corruption efforts dependent on the whims of an elite. Ensuring that civil society and the media can speak freely and hold power to account is the only sustainable route to a corruption-free society. There's also a message from our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Daniel Erickson, who says in authoritarian contexts where control rests with a few, social movements are the last remaining check on power. It is a collective power held by ordinary people from all walks of life that will ultimately deliver accountability. So there are a few other points that we need to make on corruption and human rights. And just to state that from the repression of opposition supporters in Belarus to the closing of media outlets and civil society organizations in Nicaragua and the deadly violence against protesters in Sudan, the killing of human rights defenders in the Philippines, human rights and democracy are under threat. And corruption undermines the ability of the governments to guarantee the human rights of their citizens. This in turn affects the delivery of public services, the dispensation of justice, and the provision of safety for all. Fundamental rights such as freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and access to guarantee public participation and keep corruption in check. Corruption enables human rights abuses, setting off a vicious and escalating spiral. As rights and freedoms are eroded, democracy declines, authoritarianism takes its place, which in turn enables higher levels of corruption. So for those that are interested in further details on the methodology, we've produced what we call the ABC of the CPI, how the Corruption Perceptions Index is calculated. So if you go on the website, www.transparency.org, and just CPI, you'll find the methodology. You've got a shorter version. You've got also a longer version on the CPI. Equally, when you go on the website, you go on what we call the landing page. And on the landing page, on the left, all the countries are listed. So if you put in Zambia, for instance, it will show you the changes over 10 years. CPI scores over 10 years. And below the chart, you find a number of reports on Zambia, for instance, which speak to the state of corruption. And I'm looking at my media colleagues, so they will not be calling me to say, so how is Zambia doing on the CPI? I'll be saying the web page is there, all the information is there. We have agreed. So don't bribe me by saying, no, but I'll say that's bribery. All right, let me end here. So thank you very much. I haven't touched on Zambia deliberately. I want to still keep it under wraps. Dr. Kaumba will be able to do the honors. But thank you very much.
You cannot boast of impartial democracy and civil liberties without paying particular attention to the issue of corruption. Mr. Lefuka, thank you very much for enlightening us on the correlation between corruption and civil liberties. Having been exposed, ladies and gentlemen, to how different countries are performing on the Corruption Perception Index globally, the critical question that then comes is, what can we learn from these countries? Botswana last year, I remember vividly, in this very room, was highly commended for its performance. And today we've seen a different story. So what lessons can we learn from selected African countries that have shown improvement on the index, as well as those that have, unfortunately, dropped? To be able to get insights on that, I will ask my IT team again to expose us to a video.
The National Secretariat of TI is Samuel Kaninda is my name. You from Berlin, where the International Secretariat of TI is. Samuel Kaninda is my name. I'm one of the Africa Regional Advisors, and it's my pleasure to join you for this session to discuss some lessons or share some lessons from selected African countries that are faring well on the Corruption Perceptions Index being launched today, at least the 2021 version. We'll begin quickly by looking at the picture of how Africa is doing on this index. We see that the picture that you have before you suggests that there's no significant improvement, at least for those who have been observing or following the performance of the continent over the past 10 years, the past decade. We would see that there's been no significant improvement. The score, the average score for the region is 33 from 32 last year, so no significant improvement, no significant change. And we see that on top, we have the Seashells, Cabo Verde, Botswana, Mauritius, Rwanda, and Namibia. So only 5 out of the whole continent have a score that is above 50. So the majority, most countries are below 50, which suggests that they are grappling with systemic and endemic corruption, notwithstanding the efforts that some have made, and we will see those shortly. So in terms of addressing corruption on the continent, I thought before talking about some of the specific countries, we could look at what exists in terms of the legal framework. In terms of the legal framework, we have the AU, the African Union Charter, on values and principle of public service and administration, because remember, even the CPI addresses or is concerned with perceived level of corruption in the public sector of a given country. So this charter speaks to that exactly, and you see in Article 18 that there are some specific provisions that speak to issues of transparency, accountability. So what we call anti-corruption principles are taken care of there, but also recognizing the increasing trend of decentralization on the continent and the world over. The AU also came up with a charter, at least the leaders, on values and principles of decentralization, local governance, and local development. And that also adds to the legal infrastructure that exists, at least in terms of these instruments, but also, as I said, recognizing that local governments have more and more, increasingly more power and resources at their disposal under their watch. So it's important that the checks and balances are also there to prevent corruption, but also when it arises, to tackle it. Then you have at the sub-regional level, which are known as the regional economic communities in Africa, with the Economic Community of West African States. There's a protocol that was adopted in 2001, so actually 2 years before the continental and global conventions were adopted, and you have national anti-corruption laws and strategies in many countries. But the guiding framework for the continent in terms of the fight against corruption per se is the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption. So read there on and not on, which has 28 articles, and it covers issues from money laundering to public sector corruption, illicit enrichment to financing of political parties, and corruption in the private sector. It was adopted in 2003, so next year it will be 20 years since its adoption, and so far 45 countries have ratified, and maybe the number will increase because there are still 10 member states then that need to do so. And we see that it came into force, it entered into force in 2006 once the threshold of ratifications was I believe achieved or attained. Then in terms of institutional arrangements, the main institution at the African Union level is the African Union Convention, the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, rather, my apologies, which was created in 2009, mainly to make sure it's like the monitoring institution, but also the institution that is tasked with ensuring that the convention is implemented in each member state and to follow up on those commitments. So member states are supposed to report on progress made, their own measures put in place in each country. So it is important that, so this body, the board, plays a central role, and ourselves, TI, we do have an MOU with them, which structures our working relation with the AU when it comes to the fight against corruption. And at national level, we have national anti-corruption commissions, agencies or authorities, supreme audit institutions, specialized courts in some countries to expedite economic and financial crimes of corruption. And we have anti-corruption agencies organizing themselves in regional networks for experience sharing, learning from each other, and also advocating on issues of common interest. Yes, so if we go now into what is the crux of our discussion, which is just to look very briefly, of course, time will not allow us to delve into some of the details, some of the countries, just pausing on them. The first one we thought we would mention because firstly, it is the top performer on the continent and the most significant improver, statistically so, because since 2012, so in the last decade, the point increase amounts to 18. So there's an 18-point increase over the past 10 years. So that is non-negligible and it is worth mentioning. And again, there's no silver bullet that has been applied in this country, the Seashells, but it's mainly the political will and leadership from the highest level of government, and also finding its way at other spheres and levels of government, and the number of open government and anti-corruption reforms that have been implemented, which allow, openness, transparency, and accountability in the way public affairs are managed, but also having the institutions in place. So one of the key reforms or actions that were taken was the introduction in 2016 of an anti-corruption commission. And many of you may wonder to say, yes, we all do have those, or at least in Zambia, I know that there is a commission established for some years as well. And what is key in this case is the independence that this body enjoys from political interference and other types of interferences. They are well equipped, and of course, never sufficiently. So they are still receiving support from partners, but those are key areas. And of course, because there's always areas of improvement, we believe the country could do better to make sure that it doesn't remain or attract, dirty money because of loopholes in the financial secrecy laws and all that. So we've observed that.
Agree with me that the audio is not that good, and we are all struggling to hear clearly what the gentleman is saying. And please, can I have my microphones working very well? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will move to the next segment of the program. However, I must make mention that the hard copy of the presentation, which has vital information that we feel you shouldn't miss out on, will be provided for this particular presentation that has audio challenges. So please, towards the end, be at liberty to be able to request for that presentation. You will be able to be assisted at the registration on the exit. We've come, ladies and gentlemen, to the highlight of the day. That is where we get to learn Zambia's performance on the 2021 Corruption Perception Index, and also get to understand some of the key recommendations depending on the performance of the country. And to lead us in that is Mr. Raymond Mutale. But before Mr. Raymond Mutale comes, Mr. Mutale is currently serving as Programs Manager at Transparency International Zambia, and he is a social development practitioner with vast experience in project design, project management, and monitoring and evaluation. He is a holder of a Master of Arts in Development Studies from the Zambia Open University, Lusaka, a Bachelor of Science in Strategic Monitoring and Evaluation from Lutebern University, a National Accounting Technician from the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accounts, National Accounting Technician from the Zambia Institute Accounts, a Diploma in Philosophy and Anthropology from the Catholic St. Augustine Philosophical College, and a Certificate in Monitoring and Evaluation from Cambridge Open and Distance Learning Ireland. Raymond has spent the last 18 years managing projects, providing support and organizational capacity building and policy engagement in civil society, in accountability and community mobilization and engagement, among others. It is my privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to call Mr. Raymond Mutale to give us and of course highlight Zambia's performance on the CPI 2021. I thought this is the part where you clap. Aha. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay. May I start by being lazy and write on the protocols already observed? Mine is to zero down to Zambia and highlight Zambia's performance on the CPI. It has already been indicated that the CPI is derived from 13 sources, and from the 13, Zambia's score was derived from 9 sources. What are those sources? The African Development Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, but the Bertelsmann Foundation Index, the Economic Intelligence Unit Country Risk Service Ratings, the Global Site Business Conditions and Risks Indicators, the PRS Group International Country Risk Guide, the World Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey, the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, and the Variety of Democracy Project. I will, in a little while, share how Zambia performed on each of those 9 sources. But before we do that, allow me to just share some of the findings about Zambia's status in terms of human rights. Next slide, please. The United States U.S. State Department assessment in Zambia found that there are significant issues around human rights in our country. And some of the issues that were found are that, one, I think this is something that is known by almost everyone, that we have harsh and life-threatening prison conditions. Secondly, we saw in the past 3 to 4 years serious restrictions on free expression, serious restrictions on the press, and threatening violence against journalists. The earlier presentation clearly indicated that journalists or media is one of the key players in ensuring that our society is informed, in ensuring that government is held to account. But in Zambia, we saw a decline in promoting the space for civil society to freely participate. There was increased censorship and application of criminal labor and slander laws, substantial interference with the right to freedom of assembly. We are all aware about the Bush protest by the youth last year. That is just to show some of the experiences we had as a country. We saw an increase in official corruption, but also widespread child labor. This is just to highlight that even in Zambia, what the CPI is finding is something that can speak to the reality on the ground. What about the Amnesty International assessment? Similar findings. They found that the authorities repressed rights to freedom of expression, assembly, and association. Again, journalists were victims, journalists, media, and lawyers were harassed. The police used intimidation to enforce COVID-19 restrictions. Again, the children rights come out there. Next slide. Next. Now, in 2021, the CPI focuses on corruption, human rights, and democracy. And it finds clearly that the analysis establishes that countries which violate civil rights scored poorly on the CPI. There is a high correlation there. Again, the COVID-19 pandemic opened up doors for governments to further expand the executive power, conceal information, and strip away human rights. Like any other emergency, Of course, those in authority need to act swiftly, but also it creates opportunities for abuse, because the pandemic is moving very fast and you need to respond accordingly. You end up violating rights, but also you end up taking opportunities to enhance corruption. And that is a reality that is coming out world over in terms of the COVID-19 response in most of the countries. The CPI finds that of the hundreds of human rights defenders murdered in 2020, 98% of these murders occurred in the countries, the 23 countries with high level of public sector corruption, but also the same countries scored below 45 on the CPI. Out of the 23 countries that scored below 45 on the CPI, they also showed a significant decline on the CPI, but also they indicated that they showed a decline on their respect for civil rights. That is just a background to show the connection between what the CPI is bringing out and what assessments around human rights are bringing out. But before I share the Zambian performance on the CPI, maybe let's look at the regional performance. You see that in a region, Malawi scored the highest improvement. Malawi improved by 5 scores from last year, from 30 to 35, followed by Tanzania, which increased by 1 score. It has already been indicated Botswana actually declined. Botswana declined by 5. From 60 last year to 55. Zambia, we maintained the score, 33. The score last year was 33, this year still 33. Maybe it's a good start given that we have a new Dawn administration, so pretending over our country. Let's start at the same rate or same score and see how we move forward as a country. Now, from the 9 sources that informed Zambia's score, 5 of the sources recorded reductions. And among those 5, the Bertelsmann Foundation Transformation Index indicated the highest drop. It dropped with 8 points, while the other 3 were constant, which means the score that Zambia attained last year is the same score that there was no movement when you compare 2020 to 2021. The only source which recorded an increase and therefore contributing to the to Zambia maintaining 33% was the Variety of Democracies project, which measures the pervasive levels of political corruption in the 3 arms of government. Let me now just share how Zambia performed on each of the 9 sources. The African Development Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, in 2020, Zambia scored 39. 2021, Zambia scored 34, which shows a decline by 5 points. The Bertelsmann Foundation Transformation Index, 2020, Zambia scored 29. 2021, 21, the highest drop, which is -8 points. The economic intelligence, the global insight, Zambia maintained 37 and 35 respectively, with no movement in terms of change. The PRS Group International Country Risk Guide, 2020 Zambia scored 36, 2021 32, negative 4 downward drop. The World Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, we maintained 27 in 2020 and 27 2021. The World Economic Forum Executive Opinion Survey, 2020 26, 2021 23, dropped by 3. The World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, we dropped by 1, 2020 36, 2021 35. Like I said, the Variety of Democracy Project recorded a significant improvement. In 2020, Zambia scored 37. In 2021, Zambia scored 49, representing a 12% improvement. Let's talk about the highest drop, the contributor to the highest drop. The Bertelsmann Foundation Transformation Index was focused on January to June in Zambia, and from our own assessment, the 8-point drop can be attributed to limited mechanisms and interventions aimed at preventing public office holders from abusing their positions for private interest. If you want to interrogate that more, I think one of the sources you can look at is the FIC report. I think that the FIC report gives an idea of what was happening in our country and how political corruption thrived in our country. We go now to the source that contributed to Zambia improving, the Variety of Democracy Project. It focused on January to December of 2021. And in our own assessment, the 12-point increase in the measure can be attributed to, though minimally, given that the new Dawn administration only had superintended over the affairs of the country for 4 to 5 months, disrupted the political arrangement which was a driver for political corruption, following the change in the regime, but also change in the office holders in the 3 arms of government. With this, we see that Zambia maintained the score, 33 in 2020, 33 in 2021. And from our perspective, the UPND government has an opportunity to actually demonstrate that we can move as a country on a trajectory that shows commitment to the fight against corruption, on a trajectory that shows that we can actually reverse the score that Zambia has scored in the past 2 years. What are the recommendations? The first one, we are proposing that government should uphold human rights and the rights needed to hold office bearers accountable. And this should be done through rolling back any restrictive or restrictions on freedom of expression, association, and assembly. but also to move very fast on dealing with the Public Order Act and the Constitution. Secondly, we recommend that government and law enforcement agencies should partner with global and regional financial and anti-corruption agencies in order to facilitate working around closing loopholes and to regulate professional enablers of financial crimes and ensure that the corrupt and their accomplices are not led to escape justice. We should note that we've seen some movement in the New Dawn administration in trying to deal with this. But of course, we have our own concerns in some of the things that are happening. And all we can do is, yes, it's too early, and all we can do is to encourage them and point out areas that they need to strengthen so that we deal with some of these issues that contributed to Zambia's poor performance on the CPI. Thirdly, government should take tangible steps to restore and strengthen institutional checks on power by guaranteeing the independence of public oversight bodies such as the Anti-Corruption Commission and the Supreme Audit institutions like the Auditor General's Office. Lastly, as the government scale up its fight against corruption, the COVID pandemic, as the government scale up its fight against corruption and the national response to the COVID pandemic, there is need to uphold the right to information, introduce anti-corruption safeguards in public procurement in order to maximize transparency, protect public resources, and ultimately save lives. Generally, we think that having maintained the score, we can start on a new page. We can demonstrate that we can do better as a country and demonstrate that we are serious in the fight against corruption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond Mutale, for that elaborate presentation on Zambia's performance and score on the Corruption Perception Index for 2021. And the key message is, in as much as we have maintained the score, there is room for significant improvement. And one of the litmus tests for the New Dawn administration, the UPND government, will be to make sure that key pieces of legislation, such as the Public Order Act, are amended. And the civil society organizations I must commend and mention that have been playing an active role in ensuring that the current administration is consistently reminded on some of their promises to ensure that the legal framework that will create a conducive environment for democracy and civil liberties to thrive is also given the necessary attention as they focus on areas of developing the economy and other developmental related agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, after having known what the score for Zambia is, we will now come to the most important part of the day, where we actually get to launch the 2021 CPI. And to do this, our host, Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, will come and be able to lead the procession. And for those that may not be familiar with Dr. Kaumba, those that are watching us on streams, that is KBN TV and Diamond TV, on our Facebook platforms. Dr. Kaumba is currently a lecturer at the University of Zambia in the Department of Language and Science and Social Education. He holds a PhD in education and specializes in pedagogy, theory and practices of the teaching of civic education. He is currently the head of section civic education and coordinator for the Master of Science in Peace, Leadership and Conflict Resolution. He is passionate about governance systems and corruption, with focus on modeling methods upon which the young generation can be prepared for future responsibilities free from corruption and other forms of injustice. He practices transformative pedagogies that aim at enhancing and improving the role of education in creating citizens' broader knowledge and dispositions necessary to achieving a society driven by the common good through integrity, transparency, and accountability in affairs that govern them. The thing that comforts me the most about Dr. Chivunda's profile is the fact that he has a heart for the next generation, and you cannot leave out the next generation if at all the fight against corruption is to yield results that will stand a test of time. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor, and help me to call to the podium Dr. Chivunda Kaumba to come and launch the Corruption Perception Index 2021.
Thank you so much. Allow me to say that all protocols observed. I will ride on the protocols that have been stated by others. I am reading this statement on behalf of the TIZ chapter president, Mr. Sampa Kalungu. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2021 Corruption Perception Index reviews that the fight against corruption has stagnated worldwide at the time when human rights and democracy are also under attack. This is no coincidence. Corruption enables human rights abuses. Conversely, ensuring basic human rights and freedoms means there is less space for corruption to go unchallenged. Transparency International's research shows a strong correlation between anti-corruption and respect for human rights, and that very few countries have managed to establish effective control of corruption without also respecting human rights. The 2021 CPI shows that out of the 180 countries assessed, 154 countries, representing 86%, have either declined or made no significant progress in tackling corruption in the last decade. 1.7 countries are at historic lows in their scores. Zambia is one of these. And we can say that Zambia's CPI score has steadily declined from 38 over 100 in 2016 to 33 over 100 in 2020. The 2021 CPI results have revealed that the score and rank has been maintained at 33 over 100 and 117 over 180 respectively, as compared to 2020. A more detailed analysis of the 9 underlying data sources which inform the CPI score for Zambia, indicates that Zambia's score would have likely declined if not for the change of regime. The only data source that showed an improvement is called the Variety of Democracy Project and measures the pervasive nature of political corruption in the three arms of government. The data, ladies and gentlemen, suggests that political corruption was likely to be disrupted following a change of the political players due to a change of government. This does not necessarily mean that the new government has implemented any measures that have prevented the score from getting worse. Rather, the mere change of political players necessitated by the change of government presented a disruption in the political system, and that was enough influence for a positive change on the score from the data source. The maintained score, therefore, presents an opportunity for the new regime to begin turning the tide and implement anti-corruption measures that are going to improve the corruption situation in Zambia. And this is possible as evidenced by Malawi, where the CPI score increased by 5 points in 2021 as compared to 2020. Transparency International Zambia, therefore, calls upon the Zambian government to uphold rights and the rights needed to hold duty bearers to account by rolling back any restrictions on freedom of expression, association, assembly that we saw declining in the previous regime. These include reforming the Public Order Act, amending the Constitution, and so forth. So government and law enforcement agencies should therefore be partners in the global and regional financial and anti-corruption agencies in order to close legal loopholes, regulate professional enablers of financial crimes, and ensure that the corrupt and their accomplices do not escape justice. Ladies and gentlemen, tangible steps to restore and strengthen institutional checks on those holding power must also be taken by guaranteeing the independence of public investigative and oversight bodies such as the Anti-Corruption Commission and the Office of the Auditor General. As the government scales up its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, there is also need to uphold the right to information and introduce anti-corruption safeguards in public procurement in order to maximize transparency, protect public resources, and save lives. TIZ believes that putting all these measures in place will go a long way in addressing the corruption problem in Zambia, and we stand ready to work with all stakeholders in achieving that goal. It is now my honor to declare the 2021 CPI report for Zambia officially launched. The report I'm sure we all have the copies. We can take a look at the
Thank you very much, Dr. Chivunda, for that wonderful presentation and, of course, launching the report. And, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to a time when we will get to hear reactions from stakeholders. As you are all aware, the conversation on corruption is not one of a mono nature. If at all, it is to be meaningful and, of course, yield intended results of reducing the scourge. So to be able to provide some reactions and thoughts on Zambia's performance, and not only that, but of course, recommendations that have been given by Transparency International Zambia, I will call representatives of organizations. Please, once I mention, and if you are in the audience, I will request you to come and take a seat at the front. So we'll start with the Public Accounts Committee representative. Any representative from the Public Accounts Committee? NAZ? You may come through, please. Then we'll go to the Anti-Corruption Commission representative. Any representative from the SCC, Anti-Corruption Commission? All right. The gentleman is right there. Action Aid Zambia. I'm glad it's a woman. I was getting worried. I was like, oh, is this a man affair? Representatives from the University of Zambia. Okay. Do we have a representative from the judiciary? Last but not the least, we will have a representative from the Human Rights Commission. All right, I think we'll do with the current panel that we have. And on this session, ladies or gentlemen and lady, we'll each have 5 minutes to be able to provide our reactions to the launched 2021 CPI report. And we will start with the lady on the panel.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good morning, everyone, riding on all protocols observed. As Action Aid Zambia, we note with concern the ranking in the 2021 Corruption Perception Index, where Zambia has maintained the same score, as this should be a source of worry and concern to different stakeholders and the general citizenry. This means that the country did not make any significant gains in the fight against corruption, and the question we should be asking ourselves, why is that so? Zambia has continued to record poor ranking in the CPI over the past couple of years, highlighting government's laissez-faire approach towards the fight against corruption. Therefore, our call is for the new administration to take seriously the findings of the 2021 CPI, as this gives an overview of the perception of the public sector corruption. However, Zambia's ranking does not come as a surprise to us as ActionAid Zambia. Reason being that we saw how various reports such as the Financial Intelligence Center and the Auditor General's reports were dismissed whenever they were made public and without so much concern, including the various forensic audits that were taking place in various public institutions to do with issues of social cash transfer and others. The CPI report also brings to light the gaps that exist in the various pieces of legislation and enforcement mechanisms in the fight against corruption. The report simply indicates that as a country we are not winning in the fight against corruption. As ActionAid Zambia, we want to agree with the recommendations placed in the CPI and strongly urge the government to take into consideration this recommendation. Further, we recommend the need for the Anti-Corruption Act to be reviewed and amended, considering the enhancement of the scope of the Zambia anti-corruption related pieces of legislation such as the asset declaration, the whistleblower protection, the plea bargain and negotiations, the asset recovery, local and international instruments, as well as the public procurement, to mention a few. ActionAid Zambia also notes that prosecution is a major tool in the fight against corruption, which will boost public and institutional perception, as it will ensure that corrupt offenders are held to account through prosecution. We have noted that in Zambia, most people who are involved in corrupt acts are not prosecuted. The prosecution rate is very low, especially among politically inclined officials. Therefore, as ActionAid Zambia, I would like to suggest that the approach to prosecution should be governed by the following principles. One, to deal with cases. No case is too small to be investigated. Deal with cases regardless of the rank and status of the person involved. Even if it's a minister who is said to be involved in a fertilizer deal or anything, they have to be followed whilst they're still in office. Further, deal with both the givers and takers of bribes, as they are also equally culpable. Further, we are calling on enhanced coordination among oversight institutions such as the Office of the Auditor General, Financial Intelligence Center, and the Drug Enforcement Commission, as well as the Anti-Corruption, together with the judiciary, to ensure that all corruption cases are comprehensively investigated and relevant action is taken for those found wanting. ActionAid also calls for an urgent need for more specialized training covering especially forensic accounting, looking at the sophistication and complexity of some of these crimes in contrast with the broader inadequate capacity and appropriate training of persons charged with investigations as well as prosecution of these crimes. Further, we call upon the government to increase funding to investigative institutions, as we have noted an increase in funding allocation in the 2022 national budget. However, we are of the view that they still need to increase the budget if the fight against corruption is to be won. The institutions that are involved need to be strengthened, not just in terms of the capacities of the people handling, but also the finances that enable them to undertake their work. And some of the key legislation that we are of the view that should be strengthened include the Anti-Corruption Act number 3 of 2012, the autonomy of the Commission under Section 64(1) of the Act provides that no prosecution shall commence without prior approval of the Director of Public Prosecutions. This provision appears to undermine the autonomy of the Commission as established under Section 5 of the Act, and thus must be amended to allow for the Commission to commence prosecutions of cases without being subject to any approval. Further, the security of tenure of the Director General, Section 9(2), gives exclusive powers to the President to appoint the Director General according to the terms as the President himself may determine. Section 10 does not set a term limit for the Director General, and subsection 2 of the same section mandates the President only with powers to remove the Director General from office. This provision creates a risk of undue influence by the President over the Commission, in the sense that the Director General might be inclined to accommodate the President's desires in order to secure a position and a subsequent appointment, which may undermine the fight against corruption. As an organization, we are of the considered view that the President should appoint the Director General upon recommendation by the Board or the Judicial Service Commission, and Parliament should also be given the powers to initiate the removal of the Director General from office, and the Act must provide clear and specific grounds for such removal beyond any other cause or misconduct grounds set in Section 10(2). The term of office of the Director General must also have a limited tenure. Further, staff security of tenure, the Director General may terminate the employment of any staff if such termination is in the best interest of the Commission per Section 13(4) of the Act. The use of the term best interest can be easily abused. Staff of the Commission, especially investigators, require a security of tenure for them to be able to carry out their duties without undue influence. There is need to amend this section to provide for security of employment for investigative officers by clearly listing reasons for dismissal of an employee, and the Commission should have the powers to dismiss the Director General should only recommendations be provided, and they need to be very clear. So for us, that is our reaction to the CPI, and just to congratulate Transparency International for the job well done, and for continuously not relenting in providing us the report in the successive years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Naluchaziwa there from Action Aid Zambia, Country Director. And you see that my decision to actually start with the woman was very, very timely and very, very correct, because she finished right on the dot, 5 minutes. I thought ladies were going to clap, but it's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to our next panelist to provide a reaction within the stipulated time. And on this, we will move to the Anti-Corruption Commission. And I will ask, for the purposes of live broadcasting that is currently going on, please start by introducing your name so that the viewers can also just be able to, get to know who it is that is providing insights on this important CPI 2021 report. We will now get to hear from the Anti-Corruption Commission. Please, you can just pass the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Timothy Mono from the Anti-Corruption Commission, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. The Anti-Corruption Commission is actually not surprised with the score. I think the writing is on the wall. Zambia has not been performing well with regards to the fight against corruption. We know that. I think that the issues to interrogate, some of them have been discussed. But critical is political will. You cannot achieve any significant measures in the fight against corruption without political will. It is a major ingredient in the fight against corruption. An anti-corruption agency is an agency of government. It serves government interests. It serves the public to recover the ill-gotten wealth, to ensure that resources are equitably provided across all sectors of society, and to ensure that anything that is planned for government funds are directed to achievement of those targets. And if you lack political will, an anti-corruption agency will only be following behind what has already been looted. But that is not the situation that we want. We want to be able to have interventions that will stop any looting, that will stop any misapplication of resources before they are abused. So we are glad that we have a new impetus in the fight against corruption. There's a lot of political will that has come on board, and that is recognized from the one of the data sources by TIZ, and it has been already been discussed. But also to mention that it is sad that we have, as a country, continued to tolerate corruption. We enjoy and glorify those that steal. It is very unfortunate. And yet we don't see the effect that it has on health, on education, on infrastructure, because we think it is government resources. We don't take the fight against corruption as a personal agenda. We need, as a people, to move a step ahead and not wait for agencies to fight corruption, but to take it as an individual fight, as a collective fight, as Zambians fight. We need to do that. The Commission has repositioned itself in this fight, and with its mandate, we are already geared towards making inroads to fight this scourge. You may have witnessed recently that our focus is not just about taking people to court, because taking people to court, well, it is very important, because that is what justice is about, but also to follow where the money is. When people steal, we just need to find it and recover it. And therefore, among the strategies that we have now is to ensure we use two aspects, either the non-conviction based forfeiture recovery or the conviction based forfeitures. And we will follow the money. And that is what we are doing now. But above all, we note the Betterman's data, which shows that there are limited interventions in preventing public officers from abusing resources.
Mr. Mono, you may kindly conclude, sir.
And therefore, we are working towards making sure that corruption prevention is one of our major aspects in the anti-corruption fight, and to ensure that we stop any hemorrhage of resources in our country. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mono, for that submission. And indeed, the message is very clear. The SCC will follow the money. So those that are watching right now probably have heard it as vividly as we have heard it in here. The judiciary obviously plays a very crucial role when it comes to fighting corruption and ensuring that a conducive environment for democracy to thrive is created. And as such, we will have an opportunity to hear from the judiciary.
Thank you very much, Director of Programs. My full names are Prince Boniface Mwinga. I'm Registrar in charge of Subordinate Courts Operations, as well as the Chairperson of the Judicial Integrity Committee. I can't agree more with the two previous speakers. Our reaction as the judiciary is focused on answering the question, what then do we do and how do we do it? Anti-Corruption Commission has clearly indicated they will follow the money. They will not only prosecute, but they follow the money. It is within their mandate, and the judiciary, I can confirm that if, as you follow the money pursuant to the provisions of Section 80 of the Anti-Corruption Commission Act of 2012, you desire that you actually insulate those who would have given that money through those civil proceedings as provided for in subsection 4 of Section 80 of your Act. Judiciary will always be there to actually sign those documents, because we are one in this fight. The question that always lingers is, there has been a cry, and correctly so, by my sister on my left, to the effect that the rate of prosecution is very low. It's not only that. You know, it's not all about having to prosecute so many people. It's about achieving the desired results. Judiciary is always at the end of it. When we have the law enforcement agencies investigating these matters of corruption and people are brought to court, all eyes at that point to the judiciary. The speed with which the matters are concluded, people tend to think it's only about judiciary. Our requests as judiciary is, we need to have everybody involved, because with us, the people that come to court, whatever it is the position that they could have held in the past or even at present, these people are treated in the same manner as everybody who is criminally charged with any offense, because those are the dictates of Article 18, Sub-Article 1 of our Constitution, that these people must be entitled to a fair hearing before an independent and impartial court established by law. And that adjudication must be done within a reasonable time. Now, in compliance with that, we also remember the fact that these people that come before us, they are presumed innocent in the same Article 18 until the contrary is proved. We request that if we are to move at a in a speedy manner, that we bring a conclusion, because the people of Zambia whose money is actually plundered through the corrupt practices of those that may be involved, they need to know, they need to have finality to the matter. Even those people also that are alleged to have committed those particular crimes, they also need to know. The judiciary on its part has actually, through statutory instrument number 5 of 2022, come up through the top leadership of the judiciary with a specialized division of the High Court, now called the Economic and Financial Crimes Division of the High Court. It will act as an appellate division for all matters of an economic and financial crimes nature, which actually includes corruption. At the subordinate court level, we have come up as judiciary with administrative measures whereby a particular number of magistrates have now been assigned duties to handle matters of an economic and financial crimes nature, corruption inclusive. So the idea is to have these matters fast-tracked, because we don't need to have them delayed. So on our part, we request that probably at the moment, because the difficulty we have is that there is no legal provision that actually guides us to within what period these matters should be concluded. The procedure that we follow is as provided for in Section 3 of the Criminal Procedure Code, Chapter 88 of the laws of Zambia. So under the Constitution again, you find that this accused person is entitled actually to either legal aid, and when legal aid is not granted, he or she is entitled to actually legal representation by a lawyer of their own choice. We are living under COVID circumstances. People can come up with all sorts of excuses in an attempt to delay the matter. What would a court do that is available on a particular day to hear a particular matter relating to corrupt practices, and then they are told, my client is not available because they came into contact with a person that is called COVID positive. So we have to look at all these issues, and this is why I can't agree more with my sister when we say, can we have also legislative intervention so that we may probably amend certain laws? How is evidence in cases of that nature supposed to be received? If somebody has been exposed, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're on they're in bed, they're on oxygen, they're simply home isolating. From such a person, evidence can still be received. And if we have laws that permit for evidence to be received in that manner, then the view we hold is that we will have no delays in this kind of case. working together, law enforcement agencies, together with the judiciary, I think we can achieve the goal, because ours is to receive the evidence that you bring in. If there has been a thorough investigation and the evidence is there, it points to the fact that this particular offense was committed. There will be no problem. The adjudicative power will be actually pronounced by the court. I submit.
Thank you very much. The importance of collaboration has emphasized, and as we move to our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, the role of academia in the fight against corruption can never be underemphasized. Apart from challenging the rationale behind certain policies or providing research that can inform progressive policy that may lead to meaningful gains in the fight against corruption, academia indeed is an important stakeholder when it comes to the fight against corruption, and as such, we will get to hear from the University of Zambia.
Thank you very much, and thanks to TIZ for inviting me. My name is O'Brien Kava. Although I come from the University of Zambia, I'm speaking in my individual capacity and not speaking on behalf of the university. Thanks. And thanks very much to TIZ for the wonderful presentations on the CPI. As the presentations have made clear, corruption is a major issue as it impedes development. It leads to violation of human rights, and ultimately it potentially violates human dignity, and therefore we must fight it aggressively. And I would propose 3 possible areas of intervention in order to try to combat this problem. So the first one is to do with access to information, or the right to information. So as we already know, corruption thrives in secrecy. So where information about the utilization of public funds is not readily available, then this enhances and increases opportunities for corruption, and it becomes difficult for citizens to hold government accountable. So in this spirit, I would propose that the government should speed up the process of passing legislation around access to information, but also there's need to empower civil society that works in this sector so that it gets appropriate information and makes use of this information to hold government accountable. The second issue I raise is the issue of strategy in terms of tackling corruption. That is past corruption, present corruption, and future corruption. Although there has been goodwill, as we have heard, since the last election, at the same time, I think from where I stand, there's no clear strategy from the government. The fight against corruption as of today looks uncoordinated, and yeah, so you don't really know which direction the government is going. So today you hear the principal concern is about asset recovery, and next day you hear something else. So I would urge the government to give us a clear strategy in terms of where they want to take the country in fighting corruption. Third and finally, I think it's the issue of strong institutions. So in my view, I think the last 7 years, Zambia has been a story of collapsed oversight institutions. So almost all the institutions tasked with oversight and tackling corruption failed the country. Talk about the judiciary, the Anti-Corruption Commission, DEC, yeah, so almost all the main players in the sector from government perspective, in my view, failed the people of Zambia. And you can see the same institutions that sat on the information about corruption are now busy pursuing these cases. So which tells you that with appropriate insulation from the executive, these institutions are capable of discharging their mandate appropriately. So this tells us that we need to seriously empower our institutions. We need to rehabilitate these institutions. We need to reform these institutions. In my view, the proposal around constitutional reform would provide an appropriate opportunity to re-engineer these institutions. My only worry around the constitutional reform is that we haven't had any clear position from the government on constitutional reform. I think the messaging from the Minister of Justice is so unclear and uncoordinated. In one speech, I think the minister said people submitting on their own, and in another speech we hear something different. So I'd urge the Minister of Justice to give us a clear position on constitutional reform, and here I'd urge also civil society to prepare, assuming the process moves forward, to prepare appropriate input so that the process is fruitful. In my view, without a good constitution, we cannot win the battle against corruption. A good constitution should be our shield in moments when we get bad leadership. So a constitution that collapses or yields to bad leadership, I think, is a constitution that doesn't save the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not the least, we will get to hear from the Public Accounts Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Moses Chuba, Committee Clerk, Public Accounts Committee from National Assembly of Zambia. First and foremost, I wish to commend the Transparency International Zambia for the launch of the Corruption Perception Index 2021. This launch is critical to the National Assembly, especially because it will enable the National Assembly to capacitate the members of Public Accounts Committee and similar committees in order for them to be better able to come up with appropriate recommendations on the matters that are raised based on the irregularities of the reports of the Auditor General. This also will enable the members to ensure that they come up with prudent recommendations that will ensure that there is prudent management of public resources which are appropriated by Parliament. So by and large, this is commendable, and it is critical that through committee recommendations such as the Public Accounts Committee, corruption will eventually be eradicated. With those few words, I thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to yet another wonderful time. Like I said earlier on, the conversation on corruption is an inclusive conversation and not a preserve of the select few. Therefore, I will now open the floor for some questions or comments. So by a show of hands, the microphone will come to you. Already I can see a hand, and you will be able to ask a question that can be responded to. Now, I must make mention, ladies and gentlemen, that please keep your questions or comments brief. We want to accommodate as many as possible, but at the same time, still be within the time frame in which this meeting must be able to take place. All right, so since I come from the media, I'll start with my colleague from the media, and then I'll come to you.
Good morning, panelists, and good morning, everyone. My name is Edwin Daka, representing Sanza TV. I'd asked this question yesterday at some platform and I wasn't satisfied with the answer. In the spirit of allowing institutions to operate freely and execute what's supposed to be done in the fight against corruption, of late we have seen or heard the president on so many occasions calling the previous government as thieves. And yet, I understand to say these individuals are still under investigation. Doesn't this jeopardize the institutions or the judiciary, knowing that a presidential statement is policy direction?
Thank you very much. We'll go to the next question or comment.
Thank you so much. My name's Adam Daka. I've two questions, one for O'Brien and one for Timothy. I recall last year when the CPI was launched, one of the government officials indicated that they did not rely on foreign sources of data. As we have seen that the CPI on Zambia, the sources of data came from, 9 sources, and they dismissed those sources, that they did not rely on those foreign data. So, O'Brien, what have you to say, or what's the message to such people? And then for Timothy, you have indicated that the strategy you're using now is to follow the money and recover the resources or assets. But I feel that the looters, plunderers, thieves should be excited, knowing that you just get the money from them and leave them free. I think maybe we need to go a mile further instead of just getting the money. Because even for me, I would say, let me steal. When Timothy comes, I'll just give the money and then I go back home. I think maybe we need to do more on that one. So I need your comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any other last question? All right, we can have the gentleman over there, and then we get the panelists, yes, to respond.
Thank you so much. My name is Lakson Lungu. I'm a member of the Transparency International Zambia. My appeal to Anti-Corruption Commission is that since you have clearly indicated that you are going to ensure that money is recovered, we are requesting or appealing to the Commission to make sure that they apply transparency in the recovery by making sure that they give continuous updates in terms of how much money or assets are being recovered by the Commission. That will give confidence to the citizens because they will know exactly how the Commission is moving. Because evidence is there, clearly indicated, and you have agreed that indeed there has been plunder of national resources. So even as we start recovering, let there be clear updates giving the citizens information regarding how the assets are being recovered. Then allow me also to address an organization or institution which is not the APNAC, African Parliamentarians Network Against Corruption. I wish there was a representative. That particular institution, I think, is an institution that should help government in helping this recovery process of assets. The APNAC should help to make sure that they stand with the institutions of government that are fighting against or that are helping to fight against corruption. So I'm appealing to the media to check with the African Parliamentarian Network Against Corruption in this fight against corruption, especially where asset recovery is concerned. We want to hear APNAC bring out a clear voice on this particular issue. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. We will proceed to the panelists and get responses. So again, friendly reminder, we can try as much as we can to compress our responses so that we allow this session to get as much contribution as possible. And let me also hastily mention that Mr. Maurice Nyambe, Executive Director, TIZ, you are also at liberty to participate in this session should you have a contribution as well as Mr. Raymond. We will start with the judiciary, and then proceed to the Anti-Corruption Commission.
Thank you very much. I take it, I think my reaction will only be with respect to the question from Mr. Daka. Alleged statements from officials currently in government, allegedly referring to officials who held government positions in the previous government, thieves. Doesn't this undermine the judiciary? The answer to Mr. Daka's concern is that no. Judiciary, in its business, is never influenced by what is said orally or even in print media. Never influenced, because our mandate is very clear. It is derived, the judicial authority that judiciary exercises is derived from the people of Zambia, who are the true repositories of judicial authority, as envisaged by the provisions of Article 118, Sub-Article 1 of the Constitution of Zambia, Amendment Act number 2 of 2016. Under that provision of the law, as judiciary exercises its judicial authority, the people of Zambia obliges us to ensure that justice is done in a just manner, that judicial authority is exercised in a just manner, aimed at promoting accountability, and that it must be done to all without discrimination and within a reasonable time. So never, without our decisions are influenced by the evidence that is brought before court, by the witnesses led by the prosecution team, and then we apply the law under which those people are actually arraigned to the evidence, and the decision is made. I submit.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mono.
Thank you. And also maybe to add to that is that as an agency that investigates, you cannot rely on just mere pronouncement that someone is a thief. Ours is to gather evidence. Evidence that will prove that this person is a thief. And therefore, our role is to ensure that we go out there to obtain as much documentary evidence, as much evidence from people that can corroborate that information, so that we take this matter before the courts of law, who will deal with it as has been elaborated. So we are not influenced by those statements. With regard to a comment from Mr. Daka here, from TIZ, that the looters will go scot-free because now they think that we will not follow them. I think my point was that we will follow the money, and that is one of our major strategies. In following the money, I mentioned that we will either use the conviction-based forfeitures or the non-conviction-based forfeitures. So we'll either take you to court and be convicted and still get whatever else you have looted, or we'll go into a non-conviction-based forfeiture and recover whatever it is that you have acquired. And in doing so, we'll be guided on whether there's so many factors. Do we have adequate evidence and so on? And whether we enter into some plea bargaining. So there are rules and regulations to guide non-conviction-based forfeitures. We will not allow people to go scot-free. They will be taken to court. They will be arrested. But also there are so many other strategies which include system re-engineering, public education, because we know that the looting is because the systems are not strong enough to stop the corruption.
So we need to deal with the systems. Then with an appeal from TIZ, again, Mr. Laxalung here, we thank you that you want regular updates. We will give you the regular updates. And please don't, when we delay, because we know that public expectation is very high. People want to hear and see these things. But we will give you these updates without, like has been said, jeopardizing our investigations. Because we want to take these cases to court for justice's sake. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks. There's a question addressed to me by Mr. Adam Daka. That last year there was a government official who said they do not rely on foreign sources of data. Yeah, but then you should have asked him how much funding government gives to research. Yeah, but, my honest view is that the truth does not depend on who says it. It doesn't change color according to the person who says it. I think it is very clear that we have a lot of corruption in the country. And even our own reports from FIC and the Auditor General make it clear. So even if we put aside the foreign data, our own reports tell us that there's serious corruption in the country, and this is something which needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the interest of time, are there any more questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times, which is unusual. None. I take it that there is no question addressed to the panelists, and obviously that shouldn't surprise anyone because they've done quite a very good job in terms of reacting and vividly just explaining what they feel, you know, the 2021 CPI means within the perspective of their institutions. At this juncture, I will kindly request our host, Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, to just come back to the front, including the high table. I hope our camera people are ready. The panelists as well, kindly join the high table. So we will take our official photo for the 2021 CPI. Of the backdrop.
Corruption Perceptions Index, also known as the CPI, scores and ranks countries around the world based on how corrupt their public sector is perceived to be. The scores reflect the views of experts or surveys of business people, not the general public.
We know Zambia has maintained the score, but we can still smile because there's hope.
We calculate the CPI using data from 13 different external sources.
Thank you very much.
International is
Thank you very much. As I ask the high table and the panelists
to revert to their seats,
data produced by
I
the
will
World
take
Bank and the World Economic Forum, as well as by private risk and consulting companies and think tanks.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the program, allow me to just invite our host, Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, who is representing the chapter president, Mr. Sampa Kalungu, to just come and give us closing remarks.
It has been quite a very informative day, and I hope many of us have picked one or two issues that we are going to take home with us. But however, I thought I should make emphasis once more that the CPI data is not produced by Transparency International or its chapter, Transparency International Zambia. The role of TI is to interpret and disseminate data produced by other institutions. And this is to say that TIZ does not produce this information to oppose any institution or government, but to provide platform for dialogue, access to information, as well as provide checks and balances where it's due in order to improve the affairs of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard that human rights abuse and shrinking democratic space undermines the fight against corruption. And thus, to make meaningful progress towards the fight against corruption, we need to ensure that individual liberties are respected. Individuals, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders or institutions must be given a platform where they are heard, as their voice plays a leading role in offering checks and balances. Ladies and gentlemen, the fight against corruption is not for TIZ alone. In the journey to addressing the issue of corruption, we require that individuals, various censors, and government departments and its officials per se provide enough support, practice integrity, honesty, transparency, and also become accountable in their action. I challenge the civil society organizations and government departments present in this forum to upscale their approach towards protecting human rights and the democratic space in order to create an environment conducive to have a corrupt-free society. I am happy that the organizations present have all agreed to the fact that the fight against corruption is a fight for all. And I hope that you will stand with us and stand with all in the race to widen the democratic space, as it is a breeding ground for a corrupt-free Zambia. On that note, I would like to thank the panelists from the different organizations present for appearing and supporting us in the fight against corruption. Please remember that your cooperation will go a long way in the history of this fight. Let me also thank other organizations and individuals present for your attendance and participation. With those few remarks, and before I close the meeting, May I also remind us that we can get live CPI updates on the Transparency International website, which is www.transparency.org. Ladies and gentlemen, I now declare the meeting officially closed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, representing Chapter President Mr. Sampa Kalungu. As you've heard, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is officially over, and once again, allow me to reiterate my gratitude on behalf of our host, Dr. Chivunda Kaumba, and of course, Mr. Morris Nyambe, leading the Transparency International Zambia team, the board members, the distinguished invited guests that came to participate in the proceedings of this meeting. I want to wholeheartedly say thank you very much. Continua aluta. Let's soldier on in the fight against corruption. As we depart, there's some information packs that we have for you on the information desk over there, so please make sure to grab that pack. And also we have some sodas over there that you can indulge in. And those of you that still want round 2 of food, we still have food over there. TIZ is very gracious enough, and that food is paid for. Ladies and gentlemen, we are free to interact and depart. Thank you very much. The name is Wenson Mavor, and I've been your Director of Ceremonies. So media, for housekeeping, logistics, please ensure that you also stay behind.
Ironically, political leaders who should be taking actions to curb the flows of dirty money are the ones abusing the system's opacity and benefiting from the status quo. Governments are out of excuse. They must regulate the offshore industry.
This is a make or break decade for our planet and the people that call it home. 2030 is the deadline for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, a set of ambitious targets for a better, fairer, and more equal world for all. The global fight against corruption is crucial to achieving these goals, and Transparency International is determined to lead that fight. Our new strategy for the years 2021 to 2030 is a roadmap to a better future, a world where the common good comes first, and where power is held to account. The challenges ahead are many. We are witnessing an increase in populism, and with it, the declining of trust in institutions and less space to make our voices heard. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, and conflicts are intensifying these threats. But despite the many challenges, there are also opportunities. Our societies understand better than ever the devastating consequences of corruption. There is now less tolerance for the harm it does to people and their communities. Technology has given us the opportunity to improve governance and has helped us be more informed and engaged about decisions that affect us all. People are ready to take action and to demand transparency and integrity from those with power, holding them to account. Our vision is of a world free of corruption. Over the next decade, we will work with governments, politicians, businesses, and people everywhere to help make this vision a reality for everybody and everywhere. Learn more about our strategy at transparency.org/strategy.
Transparency International presents the Corruption Perceptions Index 2019. Using a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, the CPI analyzes public sector corruption in 180 countries and territories around the world. The top countries are New Zealand and Denmark, while the bottom countries are Somalia, South Sudan, and Syria. However, when it comes to improving on corruption, the majority of countries are stagnating. Our analysis shows how the stream of big money in politics is linked to higher rates of corruption. In fact, low CPI scores are also associated with higher concentrations of power among the rich, while poorer citizens have little to no political influence. But even countries with high CPI scores aren't free of corruption. Multiple scandals show that transnational corruption is often facilitated by countries at the top of the index, countries where the proceeds of corruption are stashed. To prevent corruption and ensure that politicians and institutions always act in the public interest, governments must meaningfully engage citizens in decision-making processes. Help us spread the word.
Transparency International presents the Corruption Perceptions Index 2020. Using a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, the CPI ranks 180 countries and territories by their perceived levels of public sector corruption. This year, more than 2/3 of countries scored below 50, which shows that there is still a lot to do to root out corruption. But even countries with higher scores on the CPI have had their share of corruption problems. In a year marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, corruption has further undermined both public health and democracy, and, ultimately, cost lives. Measures taken by governments during the pandemic often lacked transparency, restricted civil rights, and served private interests over the public good. Go to transparency.org/CPI 2020 to see how your country measures up and what you can do about it.
Ironically, political leaders who should be taking actions to curb the flows of dirty money are the ones abusing the system's opacity and benefiting from the status quo.